The president of the United States is the leader of the free world, and as such, he has to make decisions about U.S. policy, in regards to different countries around the world, policies which then many other Western countries will follow, or at least take into consideration when they decide how to deal with those countries. And so, of course, it's no surprise when the US president decides that he thinks sanctions should be imposed on countries in the Middle East. Countries in the Middle East are, by and large, not friends of civilization, not friends of freedom, and placing sanctions on them sounds like a good idea. So Biden is following that good idea, but he is placing sanctions on the one country that the US should see as an ally, that the free world should see as part of it, and that is Israel. Now, this is sort of nothing too harsh, but enough apparently to cause as much damage as Biden can to Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, as much political damage. Because again, as the leader of the free world, Biden might sometimes want to inspire regime change in some Middle Eastern countries, and the country he wants to change the regime in is Israel, where the leader is elected by the people. By the way, this leader might be elected by the people again, pretty much just because of Biden, but that's a story for another day. So yeah, there was an article in Tablet magazine which detailed what the U.S. is doing under Biden, how in the last few months they have imposed sanctions in different types of kind of bizarre ways, but with the intention of harming Netanyahu politically, so that he is removed, or at least that the right wing of his party is weekend. Welcome to the Daily Objective. Daniel, your thoughts on this article in general before we get into the article itself and start reading it.
Yeah, I think we can go in pretty early, but yeah, pretty much USA has been, while probably the strongest ally of Israel, uh, the actions that have been done by America kind of show that the best is not usually actually good, or basically, it can get better. And yeah, there have been sanctions in the past, mainly against the Israeli settlers. But yeah, especially when you think about basically the climate we are in right now, basically what the sanctions mean, what do they signify? Again, Israel has been attacked on October 7th, and when a nation is attacked, a certain actions have to be taken. And Israel has been criticized, has been put down by mm, the international community, but by even the America itself, for basically doing the bare minimum what I would expect a rational government to do when it is attacked. So I think we can go into article pretty much straight away. I have a few more points I'd like to make, but I think they're gonna be made better with the article. Uh,
Cool. Yeah, so I'm not gonna read the whole article. I'm gonna skip parts of it, and we will put it in the chat and in the description so people can read the whole thing at your own time. But I'm just gonna uh skip some of what I don't think is relevant, for at least for our commentary. The article starts: President Biden recently achieved a historic first for which he has received no credit. He is the first president to form an interagency team dedicated to imposing sanctions on an ally, namely Israel. The article later on continues after giving some historical references. It says the Biden administration has assembled an intra-agency team of targeteers tasked with finding individuals and groups to sanction, not to reverse a specific policy, but to weaken, if not topple, the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The existence of this machine has been hiding in plain sight since last February, when Biden issued an executive order claiming that violence by Israeli settlers in the West Bank was threatening the stability of the entire Middle East. The order laid out the justification for the interagency team of targeteers and provided it with the necessary legal authorities to generate sanctions packages. So yeah, we talked. I don't remember what we dedicated whole shows to and what we didn't. But we talked about a lot of this stuff about the U.S. Seemingly intervening in something that is none of its direct business, like settler violence, which we've spoken also about the fact that it's you should be very careful with news reports about settler violence. There are certainly among the settlers many people who would commit violent acts if possible, but much of this evidence comes from those the evidence of the violence comes from the cameras that B'Tselem, Israel, an anti-Israel organization within Israel that we've done several episodes on, gives to Palestinians to document said violence. And with cameras, you can turn them on and you can turn them off, and you can do the things that you don't want filmed, then turn it on when the response comes. So I've had a problem with the very idea, but even if that were the case, um, Israel deals with that. Israel does not allow that to happen, and when it happens, it punishes people. Now, the idea there's a broader idea here that somehow the settler violence against Palestinians is what's causing problems in the Middle East. No, the fact that Jews live it bothers some people in the Middle East, and the fact that it bothers them is what is the reason why there is no peace in the Middle East. So, the idea that settlements as such are a problem derives from that. And of course, if you can add claims of violence, that is an added bonus. But it is weird to say something like that a few months after October 7th. The fact that settlers, the worst things they're accused of are bad, but nothing compared to the armies of savages that surround Israel and day and night work on their ultimate goal of exterminating the Jews.
Yeah, so when it comes to these sort of sanctions, and maybe now speaking more broadly, whenever it comes to uh, I believe the proper function of government is basically the protection of individual rights. And to that extent, they should be able to basically have a military, have a police force, and have some sort of judiciary system, as well as some sort of representative democracy. So I think that's as far as a state goes. But when it starts dealing basically when it starts dealing with economy, starts dealing with favors, starts dealing with punishments, I think it becomes very problematic. And whenever we get to that point, many people start arguing, well, the United States government, for example, gives money to universities. So if these universities are taking money, they should do something for the United States. Or basically there should be some obligation with that money, and I always dislike that because it only fuels basically the growing of government, and it only makes it again more it just makes it harder to get that away with. And that also happens when it comes to any sort of international, let's say, treaties, alliances. If United States believes Israel is its ally, in a sense that United States has many enemies in the Middle East, in the region. Israel, both because it is a Western aligned democracy, it's a much more freer government than the other ones in the regions. I think it's good for United States to ally itself in basically in its own self-interest, that it wants help to fight the enemies in the region. So I think it's good for the United States to basically, send a foreign aid into Israel to help them, because they have, they have common enemies. But once it starts basically dealing with, well, now that we give you money, we want this for it. I think at that point, uh, I, I'm starting to becoming I start to become very skeptical of that whole thing. I think it's very bad for basically government to have so much for the United States to have basically these sort of like demands that are basically coming with the money. I think you support them or you don't, but you don't attach strings to this.
So I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I mean, it does make sense that if the United States supports an ally, it supports it for certain reasons, and wants that support to be received and applied in a certain way. The problem is the way the U.S. wants that support to be applied. The U.S., agrees to sell weapons to Israel as long as Israel doesn't really use that weapons too much to win a war. So in that sense, that's a big issue. And yeah, in terms of intervening in internal politics, that is definitely not something that should be for sale by any free country. Um, Bonnie asked here, unless we're at war, are sanctions even constitutional? So later on, the article does deal, I don't know if with the whether or not it's constitutional, but with the legality of it. So let's continue the article. And again, I'm skipping parts of it, and we'll hopefully get to that part as well. Um, so the United States has established an interagency initiative to produce sanctions against Israeli entities and individuals. The team convenes frequently to meet the goal set by the president and his top advisors of rolling out packages of sanctions with regularity. By my count, the authors count, 6 tranches have been rolled out so far. The next tranche I've learned is already prepared, waiting for release after Iran attacks Israel so that the administration can dodge the accusation of weakening Israel in a time of war. Uh, just my personal note there before we continue. The idea that they can dodge that accusation in any way, considering their policy, I think is ridiculous. But who knows what stories politicians tell themselves. The article continues. The regularity of the rollouts, which average about 1 tranche per month, matter to the administration more than the specific content of the sanctions. The goal is not to reverse any policy by the Israeli government, but to create a climate of controversy around Netanyahu and his right-wing coalition partners. Biden did not create this sanctions machine in response to any development on the ground in the Middle East other than the surprise attack by Hamas on October 7th. When the attack generated the fear in Washington that the resulting war would strengthen the Israeli right, Biden launched an initiative to counter it. Yeah, so a lot in there is interesting. First of all, the attack, of course, strengthened whatever elements of the Israeli so-called right say, look, giving Palestinians stuff in exchange for them not killing us is not working out for us. Let's try something else. Yeah, that side is kind of strengthened by the um, how difficult the Palestinians made it for Israelis to delude themselves that peace is possible. But yeah, also it should be noted that Biden's ongoing attempts to hurt Netanyahu politically have done wonders for Netanyahu, who was so certain, it was so clear after October 7th that his days are numbered. And now in one recent poll, his party is actually leading. It's amazing. Biden is very successful at getting the exact opposite result of what he tried to get here. Daniel.
Yeah, so let me maybe correct myself on the earlier statement about the strings attached, because I think it very much depends. Basically, what I meant is, in a sense, if it comes as we give you this money and it's for this specific thing and use it in this way, I think that would make sense. But if it's more like, we are giving you money and afterwards that is sort of like, well, we give you this money, why don't you now do something for us? I think this sort of like shady stuff is, I think, what I have more problem with. But yeah, this whole idea of like wanting to intervene in the internal politics, I think, is very problematic. One, because you're not really solving anything just because uh, if you install if you force a leader on Israeli people or something like that, if they are a democracy, they'll just in the next election cycle they'll just go with whatever you know whatever the sentiment is there. So this sort of thing, this sort of like realpolitik, this sort of like pragmatic politic will never actually achieve anything important. But yeah, I mean, this is not the first time. If you remember a few months back when the US Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer basically called for Israel to replace Netanyahu, basically called for Israel to have an elections. I think this is something that's super inappropriate. I mean, Israel had an election 2 years ago. It doesn't have to have another election for next 2 years, basically, unless it's being called for. And like, I think you obviously, as a politician, you have a certain agenda. You obviously have a certain preference. You would rather have, let's say, different people in different countries in power based on your sort of belief, your sort of view of politics. But saying that out loud as a politician, especially to someone, you could say that about Russia, yeah, I want Putin to die. I don't really care. And I don't think it should matter. But again, Israel, a democratic nation, a free nation, ally of the US, saying that, yeah, you basically want their elected leader to be replaced, coming from an ally during war is, yeah, I mean, just imagine this happened like during World War II. FDR just went, yeah, now I cannot think of even his name. Churchill,
Churchill?
yeah, yeah, Churchill. We might want a different guy. I mean, that would be crazy to hear. And I think something that's also mentioned in the article, just quickly, Biden's former ambassador to Israel, Tom Knights, has said that we need to get the crazies out. We need to bring the moderates
Yeah, I
back
was
in.
going to read that.
Okay. Okay, let's go there.
Yeah, let me just quickly say thank you to Jeff for the super chat, and second what you're saying. Look, we've talked about Trump being upset with Netanyahu because Netanyahu called what's his name, Biden, to congratulate him after the previous election. I'm pretty sure Netanyahu wanted Trump to win, but that's the thing you do. You call whoever wins to congratulate them, and yeah. I'm sure there are many leaders, including allies of the US, that think maybe Biden shouldn't be in office if he can't like string a sentence together, but they're not saying it out loud, whereas the US is through official and semi-official channels. And yes, this is another one. So the article continues. Tom Nides or Nides, or however his name is pronounced, Biden's ambassador to Israel until July 2023, almost certainly reflected the current view of the Biden administration when, at a recent conference, he called for substituting right-wing ministers like Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir with opponents of Netanyahu like former Prime Ministers Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. Quote, we need to get the crazies out. We need to bring the moderates back in, Naides said. Let me read another paragraph and then we can pause, and then I want to read the next part. But it was undoubtedly with this goal in mind that Biden's Israel sanctions machine proposed sanctioning Ben-Gvir. Biden personally nixed the idea, but someone in the administration made sure to leak to the press the fact that the proposal was under consideration. Even sanctions that do not receive approval can still generate press reports that further the goals of the campaign. Again, this is such meddling at such level in internal politics. Ben-Gvir, I'm not a fan, but he is a minister because of the number of Israeli people who voted for his party, his and Smotrich's combined list in the election for the previous Knesset. Yeah, again, I'll go back to the example of it would not be delusional to think that probably people in Israel don't like Blinken. But are they going to impose specific sanctions on him and say, look, this guy is, we're not going to deal with him? No, because that's what the U.S., the U.S. the population elected Biden. Biden gets to appoint his Secretary of State, and that's how it works. So yeah, this is really unprecedented. And yeah, you had a comment on that, and then we'll get to something I think even more unprecedented.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, the sanctions about or for Ben Gvir. I mean, the whole like leaking to press, it almost reminds me of an episode of Yes Minister when they like left all the documents on the table and invited someone a journalist just to like leak something to force the prime minister to basically do something. Again, this sort of like politicking, this sort of like we leak that we are planning to do something about Ben Gvir. So, Israel, in a sense, does something. Yeah, it's something that's really like, kind of shady about politics. But again, this coming, the from the International Criminal Court, the arrest warrants for Netanyahu and for sorry, remind me of the name, uh,
Gallant.
yeah, and Gallant. That those in a sense have been started by Karim Khan. Have not, I think, officially have been issued, but are in the works. Of course, also the other side also has arrest warrants of them, although one of them is not gonna have arrest warrant against him because he's already, as we say, with the virgins. Uh, but yeah, this coming, it really is ugly to see when you already had Israel already has the international community against itself. And again, what do you get from your best ally? Sort of joining them in these warrants or sanctions or whatever else.
Yeah, and I don't know if we'll get to it, but the article does mention that things like that would not happen or would be less likely to happen, or certainly would be less likely to have the support of European countries if the US didn't want that to happen. If the US said, no, you can't do this, this is hurting the prospects for a real peace,
Yeah,
which
I mean,
involves.
let me just jump in. When there was a potential about arrest warrant for George Bush for the Iraq War, American. I'm really uh, losing words. American House has basically passed the legislation that would give a right of president to invade whatever country would actually arrest those people. I mean, imagine like having that sort of like balls, like doing something like that, and that technically does apply also to Netanyahu. So the Americans could use this legislation to basically, if something were to happen to Netanyahu, some countries already said that they would basically, if the ICC would give out a arrest warrant for Netanyahu, those countries would comply. So, imagine if America just said, "Yeah, we still have this thing. We didn't get rid of this."
Yeah. All right. I want to get to the next part because this is important. We only have a few minutes left. The administration's wait, where am I? Uh, okay, yeah. The administration's cover story that it is issuing sanctions in reaction to events in the West Bank evaporates when one examines the specific content of the sanctions. Consider the case of Elor Azaria, whom Secretary of State Blinken sanctioned last month. An Israeli medic, Azaria shot Abdel Fattah al-Sharif, a Palestinian terrorist who was lying on the wounded on the ground. The administration homed in on Azaria's story because it can be easily manipulated to support a headline such as the radicalization of Israel's military. Under scrutiny, however, the propagandistic intentions of the administration become obvious. When I served, the author again, when I served on the National Security Council in the White House of President George W. Bush, I frequently helped with the sanctioning of specific individual. This time-consuming process requires meeting strict evidentiary criteria. Treasury regulations require that misdeeds by potential subjects of sanctions must be recent, committed within the last 5 years. It was 8 years ago, however, that Azariah killed al-Sharif when President Obama was still in office. Treasury regulations will not allow him to be fitted for economic sanctions. A different legal instrument would be required to make Azariah's story newsworthy again. Biden's team found it in a law that bars entry to the United States to foreign officials guilty of gross human rights violations. Azariah is not an official, nor is he the leader of a death squad. He's a simple baker who plays no role in politics, but the administration's lawyers gave the green light nonetheless. Azariah served time in an Israeli prison for his crime. Azariah claimed that he used his gun because he feared that al-Sharif was wearing a suicide vest and had made a sudden movement. The Israeli military doubted this defense, tried him for manslaughter, and found him guilty. Stripped of rank, he also served half of an 18-month prison sentence and was released. Yet, regardless of whether Azariah acted appropriately or whether he received a just punishment, two things are obviously true. First, his case has nothing to do with the very dubious allegations of a spike in settler violence. Second, he poses no danger to the peace and security of the Middle East, the ostensible reason for creating the interagency team targeting people and entities in Israel. So the story of Elul Azariah was long before we had a show here. We would have had, I think, multiple shows about that story because, and maybe we should have a show elaborating on his story nowadays because, yeah, there was a wounded terrorist who may have been wearing a vest, may have had more weapons. You don't know. What else he could do even though he's wounded, and Azariah shot him. By the way, one of the things you do know is it doesn't matter that he tried to murder people in Israel. He's going to serve a little bit and then he's going to be released for some reason that normal people who commit crimes or let's say non-terrorists who commit crimes don't get released for those reasons. And the lesson of Azariah was learned by other soldiers. So on October 7th, soldiers in some cases chose not to shoot Palestinians because they didn't know what's going to happen if they shoot somebody who's not clearly armed, clearly dangerous at that very moment. The fact that Azariah went to prison cost Israeli lives. And so, but he did go to prison, and the U.S. is now somehow using that as a way to say, look, we're keeping an eye, we're like moving, we're like targeting specific Israelis for specific actions. And yeah, this is something that I think U.S. citizens should pay very close attention to. This is scary in how the Biden administration is using its power here to try to influence the internal politics of an ally.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. I think it's just yeah, I expect more from America when it comes to the way they act towards their allies. And while I don't know specifically about that story much, again, Israel has a court system, has basically, you know, is a modern country that has individual rights, that has a legal system that can deal with their own ways. They don't need another nation to basically impose sanctions on specific individuals because they believe Israel, you know, is some sort of like rogue nation that just lets their soldiers run free and just do whatever they want. You know, we would probably argue Israel is actually, and it's probably not even wrong. Israel goes far beyond of what you would expect for a country to do when it comes to disciplining its own soldiers, or basically, you know, making sure rules of engagement are uh, basically enforced.
Yeah. All right. There's actually more to say on this story, but we are out of time. Maybe today is one of those days where we should have flipped the topics because the topic of the reality show is Trump being interviewed by Elon. which is has some comedic value, maybe has a little bit of value for people deciding how to vote. I'm not sure we have an hour worth of stuff to say, but maybe Marco, Richard, and Anders do. Th those are the people, right?
It's Anders, Jonathan, and I think I'll join too.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I sometimes don't know who's on a show, but luckily I usually know when I'm on. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks, Daniel. We'll see you on the reality show in a couple of minutes.
Bye bye.